How we doing, Jets fans? I'm Glenn Naughton with Jet Nation Radio, jetnation.com. Be sure to log into jetnation.com where you can log in and join and become a part of what is the most active Jets message board on the web. Very special guest today. I know all of you by this point are familiar with the Draft Network and the work they do. We've got Chris Schubert of the Draft Network joining us today. I actually, in recent weeks, as draft season is ramping up, I've been looking for a lot of different pods. I use the Draft Network's draft tool pretty much daily. Saw that they had a pod, checked it out. Chris is a part of it. I heard them mention that he is in fact the resident Jets fan, and I thought I've got to reach out to this guy. Great site, and by the way, Chris, tip of the cap to the Draft Network. I mean, that's a tool that draft nerds have been wanting for years. Others have piled on, and you've seen some copycats out there. But you guys do great work. Chris, you do a great job with the podcast. How are you doing today?
Thank you for that. Very excited to be here. Excited to talk Jets football. Yes, I am the resident punching bag over at TDN when it comes to being a Jets fan. That is my role on the podcast, in the staff meetings that we have. It is make fun of Chris because he's a Jets fan. And yeah, listen, the Draft Network, it's a great place to work for. I enjoy it. And listen, you're on the mock draft machine all the time. What do you think I do? What do you think I do when I'm in between stuff during the day? I'm on the site doing mock drafts all day long. So I'm a Jets fan. Of course, that's what I do.
Yeah, it is. It's such a great tool. I mean, one of my favorite things about it, aside from the obvious, being able to run these mocks, is it's a great opportunity to get, to go through a full list of names and get names that you probably wouldn't have seen otherwise in years past. I know for myself, I would always look forward to, that first sort of 7-round mock of the season, no matter who it came from, just because it would probably be the most extensive list you could find of draft eligible players. Now through you guys, you can get 300 or 400 guys deep. And, you're looking, when you get to the bottom of that list, you're getting guys who are unlikely to be drafted, but you're looking at, priority free agents, undrafted guys. When you're into this stuff enough, that's a whole nother game itself, really, is trying to figure out who the day three or the priority undrafted guys that can make an impact are going to be.
Yeah, that's a shout out to our scouting department, right? That they work extremely hard to scout. I think by the time the season is done, by the time the draft rolls around, there will be over 400 different scouting reports on guys for people to go through to read up on these guys after they get drafted. Because listen, I love draft. It's what I do. It's my job. I know for Jets fans, it's the same way, but for a lot of people, they don't necessarily know about the guys that are getting drafted on day 3. And so those scouting reports are a perfect resource for them. So yeah, the draft never stops. It's a year-round thing, but we are getting into the meat and potatoes of draft season, and it's always a lot of fun.
Yeah. So in regards to the Jets, this draft season, just wanted to get your opinion on whether or not this is something that I feel like people say this every year. And I did an article a few weeks ago saying this, and had to kind of, recalibrate myself and make sure I wasn't being hyperbolic. But it does feel like this draft, for a myriad of reasons, is one of the more important classes the Jets will have brought in recent memory, maybe the last couple of decades, really, when you look at the circumstances, when you look at the needs, when you look at the depth of the class, when you look at the premium picks, coaching down in Mobile with the Lions. Like, how important is this class for not just for Joe Douglas, but really for the Jets as a whole?
I think it's very important, and it's very important for a couple of different reasons, right? I think first you look at there has been a priority put in place by Joe Douglas to not make the same mistakes that the previous regime did when they brought in Sam Darnold, by not surrounding their young quarterback with talent. Well, year one, you get the quarterback, you surround him with Mekhi Becton from 2 years ago's draft. You trade up and get Elijah Vera Tucker. Okay, you're starting to build that infrastructure. Now you got to expand that. You got to add weapons to this receiving core. You need to beef up the offensive line, and then you need to get your quarterback a defense so he doesn't have to drop 45 points every game in order to win. That's part one, is not doing what the mistakes that they did with Sam. But part two is this draft is the culmination of the last part of the Jamal Adams trade, because they have the second Seattle pick, which I don't think any of us thought was going to be a top 10 pick when the season began. So you got to hit a home run there. And then, oh, by the way, you're picking 38 because Carolina said, yeah, we'll give you a 2 for Sam Darnold. No problem. Here you go. So you have 4 top 40 picks. A lot of that because you were able to salvage from a bad situation in Jamal Adams, and you were able to salvage from what was a mistake in not being able to put Sam Darnold in a position to succeed. So it feels like, okay, you were able to recoup some of what was bad here. Now you got to go out and do something with it. And so when you have 4 top 40 picks, man, you got to hit home runs here. And I trust Joe Douglas in order to do that. And having 4 swings at the bat in the top 40 is going to mean some really good players, some really high profile names are going to come off the board. But yeah, there's a lot of reasons why this has to be important, because this is year 3 for Joe. And that first draft class didn't get great marks. That second draft class, okay, you're starting to build something. This third draft class with all these picks coming in, this has to be a home run for Joe Douglas.
Yeah, I agree that first Douglas class is looking bad in a lot of ways right now. I feel like if Mekhi Becton can get healthy, I'm not among those who have given up on Becton. I know everyone is so knee-jerk and everyone is so extreme with every reaction that for every little thing that happens. Not to say that what happened with Becton was little. There are some concerns there in terms of durability, in terms of, these reports that came out through the NFL Network saying Becton was putting on weight while his rehab was already going slow. I don't think Mike Garafalo is making that up, and I don't think that news gets out there by accident. So there is some concern about that. But if Becton gets his head on straight, hits his potential, of course you've got Bryce Hall, and even if say you have a backup safety, with Ashton Davis, that makes it a class you can kind of live with, because you're going to have classes, as we know as Jet fans, you're going to have classes where you pick 12 or 13 guys and none of them are good. You have 7 or 8 guys, and if Becton hits his ceiling, I don't think anyone in their right mind, he doesn't even have to hit his ceiling. His ceiling to me is Hall of Fame. If he falls short of that and makes a few Pro Bowls, I can live with that. Bryce Hall is going to be a steady starter for many years. That's 2 guys at premium spots that can kind of salvage that class. But you're right in that right now it's on life support. Denzel Mims, who knows what to make of that? I'm honestly lost for words. I can't recall a more disappointing season from a player than what we saw from him last year after flashing as a rookie. But so sitting at 4-10, I mean, first I wanted to get your thoughts on Mims. Do you think the Jets give up on him and move him? I mean, you're not going to get much for him at this point. So do you just stick with him and see what he can do, see if he gets his head on straight? And then what do you do what is your perfect day 1, round 1 scenario for the New York Jets with the 4th and 10 picks, including trade downs, if that's part of, in your mind, the ideal scenario?
All right. So a lot to answer here, a lot to digest. This is going to be good. So first on the Mims thing, I can't give up on somebody when it appears as if they had already given up on being productive, right? I mean, just watch Denzel Mims this season and tell me that that's a guy that you want to bring back and have be a part of this receiver core. He had opportunities this year, right? Corey Davis missed time. At the end of the season, like nobody was healthy. Braxton Berrios missed time. Corey Davis wasn't around. Elijah Moore wasn't around. I mean, Keelan Cole was catching passes from this football team, who was supposed to be brought in as a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4. He was their top option. And Denzel Mims, it was probably because it's the last game of the season, but it's the image of Denzel Mims this season that is just mirrored in my brain of the one snap he gets, the one play he goes out there in the Buffalo game, he commits a false start penalty. It's things like that we saw week in and week out last season that made me go, man, there's not going to be room on this team because they have to get another receiver, right? They have to add more talent to Corey Davis and Elijah Moore. I think going the trade market would be better than using 4 or 10 on a receiver. And we can talk about maybe there's one guy that I have circled and I'm going to pound the table for in the trade market. But I would move on from Denzel Mims. Listen, it's okay to admit that you made a mistake. Drafted Denzel Mims in the second round. It didn't work out. Okay, we're just going to wash our hands of this and we're going to move on. And it's time to start fresh. He probably needs to change the scenery. The Jets need to change the scenery. Just move on. And again, you're not going to get any for him. What are you going to get? 6 or 7? I don't think you're getting. I mean, that's probably the best you can do if you're going to trade Denzel Mims. You're trading him at the lowest of values. So yeah, I would move on from Mims. Don't expect a whole lot for him, and just wash the slate clean for everybody and just move on. Now, perfect scenario when it comes to 4 and 10 is interesting because I have reached this point, and it's only February 11th. Normally, it takes me a little bit longer to get here, but I've reached the point where you have 2 top 10 picks. There are great players, I think, elite talent that you can get at the top of the draft. Now, will the Jets be able to get one of those pass rushers at 4 that everyone thinks is elite? That, the board's got to play out in a way that allows you to get Thibodeau or Hutchinson at 4. 10 is tough because I think there's this middle ground, and at TDN we've talked about this a lot. There's this middle ground of the first round where not a lot of these guys probably should go in that spot, but this is more of a deep class than it is a top tier talent class. And so I think you've got the board's going to have to come to you, but there are so many different players that I think make sense at 10 that I'm not marrying myself to, man, the Jets, Joe Douglas has to get this guy at 4 and this guy at 10. And it's funny because I see a lot of mock drafts, on both TDN and elsewhere. And I see different names get thrown out there. Like I see Derek Stingley coming off the board at 10. And I'm like, I don't think the Jets are going to do that. I don't think they're going to take a corner at 10. And then I see people be like, oh, they're going to take Drake London at 10. And I'm like, that's really high for Drake London. I think that's a little high for a wide receiver. So there are some principles that I do have that, like, I don't think a corner at 10 makes a lot of sense. I do think if they would take a corner, it would be Sauce Gardner before it would be Derek Stingley. And then wide receiver, I just think 10's a little rich. I don't think there is a top 10 level talent at wide receiver. And if there was one, it would probably be Jamison Williams. But are you going to draft a guy at number 10 overall who you're not going to have for a good portion of the season? That just feels a little risky when this is such an important draft class.
Yeah, I think the receiver question is a good one. I think what I watched today, I watched Texas A&M Arkansas and watched a bit more Treylon Burks.
He's a good player.
I mean,
good player.
Like I said, I've said to a million people on Twitter, I don't want a receiver in the top 10, but when you watch Treylon Burks make these plays, I mean, no, I wouldn't be upset if he were on the roster. I wouldn't be mad if he were the pick at 10. I just don't know that I see that happening. I think, for me, I think you're looking at offensive tackle at 4 or an edge if one of the edge guys falls. And then 10, I think it's either a trade down or an edge guy. And you guys, as you know, Senior Bowl just took place. We had one of our guys, Dylan Terman, was down there. I think he told me he bumped into some TDN guys while he was down there. So who, because to me, the pick at 10, if I got to stay put, is going to be the top edge guy. What do you think of this edge class? I love this edge class. Like you said, you have the top 2 guys, and outside of that, some guys who can be, I think, very good to, great starters. That all depends on how these guys develop. But how do you feel about this class as a whole? I love it. I feel like there are 5, 6, 7 guys I'd be comfortable with getting in sort of the middle of the first round if you were to trade down from 10, and some that maybe you just straight out take at 10.
It's a lot of fun, right? Because all the attention is on Kayvon Thibodeau and Aiden Hutchinson. Mm-hmm. But you have George Karlaftis, you have David Ojabo, you have who has slowly become my favorite edge if the Jets are going to take an edge at 10, Florida State's Jermaine Johnson. This dude at the Senior Bowl was the best player all 3 days of practice on either team. You just watched him and you're like, oh, that's the best player here. Got it. We're good. Every single day, he was winning reps over and over and over again. It was impressive. So that's the guy that if they're going to take an edge at 10, that's the guy that I have circled because I just watched him for 3 days at Senior Bowl practice, and he just pops every time you watch him take a rep. But other than those 3 guys, I mean, you have Boye Mafe, who showed out at Senior Bowl, right? There are so many different guys. And again, you have to keep in mind that Robert Saleh has done this before where he's coached the Senior Bowl. It wasn't in the head coaching role here with New York, but he was on that coaching staff in San Francisco when they went down there. They put value on being able to see these guys up close and personal and being able to get to know them, right? It went all across Jets Twitter of Joe Douglas talking with Trevor Penning, right? That went viral. Everyone's like, oh, the Jets are going to take Trevor Penning. By the way, Trevor Penning, that guy would be a lot of fun in this Jets offense. Okay.
Yes.
I'm sure everybody saw the compilations of Trevor Penning just constantly just being in people's faces and being nasty. It was every rep. Like the compilation couldn't have been long enough for Twitter because you can only put up like a 2-minute video on Twitter. It was every rep. He was shoving somebody to the ground. He was talking trash. He was in somebody's face. It was incredible to see. So that's another guy that the Jets up close personal, Joe Douglas talking to Trevor Penning. You start to connect those dots at least a little bit because we know Saleh likes to do these kinds of things. So the edge class in general, I love a lot. There's, I think, great value that you can get, but Jermaine Johnson at 10 would make a lot of sense because I don't know if Ojabo or Karlaftis make sense at 4. That feels a little rich for me. I think both of those guys have question marks. And honestly, Glenn, I think Jermaine Johnson is certainly threatening. If he does well at the scouting combine, I think he's threatening to be edge 3. Right. I think he's threatening to leapfrog Ojabo and Karlaftis and be in that conversation with Hutchinson and Thibodeau because you're starting to see the noise about Thibodeau about, where does he want to play, that kind of thing. And that noise might scare some teams off and Jermaine Johnson might come up the board. But yeah, Jermaine Johnson's my guy at 10.
I think that's one of the concerns I had with Jermaine Johnson is that he may have played himself into a spot where he's off the board at 10. Maybe the Giants grab him a little bit earlier than before the Jets have a chance to get him there. And then maybe Karlaftis probably fits the physical profile more so than an Ojabo. I said a month or so ago that, go Iquanu at 4 and Ojabo at 10. But there is that sort of, there's that school of thought that is he more of a 3-4 guy? Is he going to fit what the Jets want to do? I feel like Robert Saleh can make that guy contribute. You're not going to draft in a job and have Robert Saleh say, well, I don't know what to do with this guy now. He's got enough talent there. Is he raw? Yeah, a little bit, but still the first step, the spin move, the tenacity, like there's a lot there to work with it, and a reason why he for a long time has been edge 3. I think some of the concerns are overblown about, is it a big deal that he's playing opposite Hutchinson, and is that helping him? The skills are the skills, and he's got them. So we'll see where the Jets go with that. But the other key position, while maybe not as premium a position as edge, but in terms of where the Jets have a huge need, and in my mind, going into the Senior Bowl, I thought the tight end group was the deepest class there, the deepest group in the class. You just had guys up and down, from the top guys, McBride and Likely and Weidermeier, all the way down to, the Greg Dulcich of UCLA, who I became a big fan of while actually watching a lot of Zach Charbonnet when I thought Charbonnet was going to come out. I loved Charbonnet, but in watching him, you're like, oh, Kyle Phillips, this guy can play, Dulcich can play. But the tight end, Jake Ferguson, another tight end, James Mitchell from Virginia Tech, who's not getting a lot of talk because he was hurt for much of this season, but he's another guy who can be a sort of a do-it-all wide tight end. What are your thoughts on this group? Are you among the Jets fans who have probably ordered a Trey McBride Jets jersey? And how much could he help this offense?
I'll tell you what. The tight ends was a group that when I got down to Mobile, I said, okay, first day of practice, I'm going to sit down. I'm going to watch this group because I knew the tight ends that were on the Jets side of the ball that they had gotten on their team. And I was like, okay, I'm going to watch this group. And this group had Trey McBride and it had Jeremy Ruckert in it, right? It had them going basically back to back in reps. And I'll tell you what, I understand the Trey McBride love. I caught the fever myself. I really liked what I saw from Trey McBride. It was a talking point among some of the TDN content team of, man, we got to watch Trey McBride. Didn't impress me day one. Looked just very slow. Felt like everything was tough for him to get free, to create separation. Wasn't impressed. And then the fun part about the Senior Bowl is you get to watch a Trey McBride rep and you see him and you go, okay, that didn't impress me. And then you follow it up with a rep from Jeremy Ruckert where everything just looked effortless. Everything looked fluid. It was smooth. He was able to create separation. Everything looked like it was just one motion. Didn't feel like he had to get into another gear. Everything looked great. When you're able to put those reps back to back, that's where you're able to differentiate yourself. Now I'll tell you this, Trey McBride came back and had a great practice the next day in the rain and then looked good when they were inside. So I'm not out on Trey McBride, but Trey McBride isn't the player that I thought he was coming in, right? We talk about this Jets offense and we obviously compare it to a Shanahan offense and we obviously compare it to George Kittle. I don't think Trey McBride is a George Kittle, right? I just don't think he can be that kind of player. But I'm still in on Trey McBride if they want to take him at 35 or 38. But Jeremy Ruckert is my tight end one. Was not used a lot in that Ohio State offense, right? It's not the way Ohio State's offense is designed for him to be a pass catcher, more used in blocking. But man, everything just looked effortless to me. Everything just looked, it was free flowing. It was just, you could tell he knew what he was going to do before he did it. And everything just looked great. I was really impressed by him. Again, not a scout. I don't pretend to be. I leave that to the TDN scouting team. But for me, with my eyes being down there at Mobile, Jeremy Ruckert, Trey McBride caught my eye. But the tight end that everybody in the TDN community thought had a great week, you mentioned him, Greg Dulcich. This guy every day for that practice was just doing something. Did great in the game. Just making plays. Just out there making plays, having a great week. So he's a name that I think is going to rise up the board. Isaiah Likely had a good week. And then, Glenn, those are just the guys that are at Mobile. You have the guys that weren't at Mobile. Yep. You have Jalen Weidermeier. You have Cade Otton. You have, there's just so many guys. You mentioned the kid from Virginia Tech, James Mitchell. You have all these guys that weren't there that people are talking about as tight ends. It's a big group to pick from. And I think 35 or 38, one of those two picks, if there's a tight end like Trey McBride on the board, he's coming off the board.
Yeah, and I think the thing you said that I was going to ask about next, in looking at what the Jets do or really what they don't have at tight end currently, for me personally, again, I feel like take advantage of the depth of this class. I would take two if I'm Joe Douglas. I'm not saying I take two early, but I'm taking someone in the 35, 38 range I think is ideal. But then maybe later on, maybe a Jake Ferguson if he's there a couple rounds later, or a guy like Mitchell. Would you double dip given the fact that they don't really have a legitimate threat at tight end? Even though some of us, I liked Kenny Yeboah coming in, but, liking a guy and isn't enough of a reason to not take someone who plays that position. It's not as if Kenny Yeboah did anything this season. He may eventually become a player. And like I said, I liked him coming out as I thought he would be a nice day 3 pick, ended up going undrafted. but would you consider taking 2 tight ends?
So can I answer your question with a question? In this scenario that we're playing out, I'm assuming this means that they're not backing up the Brinks truck for Dalton Schultz like everybody on Jets
Correct.
Twitter wants.
Correct.
That would be fair. Then yes, I'm fine with it, right? I mean, I certainly have my concerns about, and I understand tight end's a huge priority, and I understand the idea of, man, let's sign a guy and let's draft a guy. We'll pair those guys together. That'll be great. I understand that. I'm all in for it. I just don't think, one, Dalton Schultz is probably going to be available. I think he's just going to re-sign in Dallas. And two, he played really well this season, and now you're paying a premium because you're paying him off of the great year that he had. And that scares me a little bit, right? There's a lot of other pressing needs that this team has, mainly on defense, that I think they need to address through free agency. That I think double dipping on tight end would make sense. So yeah, I'm in on a double dip as long as it's not with the backdrop of we've also paid Dalton Schultz a gajillion dollars.
Yeah, I think with Schultz, they may make a move for him, but I want, if you can get 2 guys who can do it all, who can be a pass catcher, who can block in line, split out wide a little bit. The little bit I've watched of Schultz, he hasn't blown me away as a blocker. Whereas a guy, as you mentioned, a guy like Dulcich, he can block. I feel like Ferguson can be a good blocker. Charlie Kolar, who we didn't even mention yet, is another guy. It's just a deep class with a lot of guys who can do a lot of what you ask them. Last question on the tight ends, actually, because you mentioned him, and really, I feel like coming into the year, he was tight end 1 for everyone. Jalen Weidermeier. Any concerns with him for you? Again, having rewatched that Texas A&M Arkansas game today, he had back-to-back drops in that game on the same drive. I don't have the opportunity to watch 10 different games on every single guy, but I would say on the 3 to 4 games I've watched Weidermeier play, I think I've counted about 7 drops. That at some point, you're like, is it a fluke thing? Did I happen to catch his worst couple of games, or is this a legitimate thing? Because he has gone from tight end 1 on a lot of people speculating he's dropped and had a few guys leapfrog him now.
So I will tell you, because I can look at the TDN scouting report, and the way that we do the scouting reports, the person who writes the film evaluation says what games that they've watched.
Right. Yes.
They say the best game and the worst game that they've studied. So I didn't know what Weidermeier's scouting report looked like. So I wanted to see if the game that you mentioned ended up here on the list. It didn't. The worst game that was studied by Brentley Weisman, who did the scouting report on Weidermeier, he referred to the Alabama 2021 game as the worst game he watched. He did not watch the Arkansas 2021 game. That's not part of this list. So maybe that's a bit of a different here. But I will say this, when it comes to these players, right, there's so much of what is expected of you before the season. And if you don't live up to that, you just all of a sudden, now you're the worst player in the world. We can't draft you where we thought you were going to be drafted. You're the worst of the worst, right? That's just a natural reaction that we all have. And hopefully everyone catches me being facetious about that, but that's what happens, right? If there's an expectation, when there's an expectation of a guy and then they don't meet what the media driven narrative on that guy is, now it's all of a sudden, well, we can't draft this guy in the 2nd or 3rd round. What are we doing? There's that. And then there's also, like, I don't know how many people watch Trey McBride at Colorado State, and now everyone's talking about Trey McBride, so he gets talked up. Everyone's talking about the week that Jeremy Ruckert had. Okay, he gets talked up. And so Weidermeier, not there, not doing these things. So you see these guys that are out there, that are in front, that are on the front of people's minds because they're out at these events, they're doing things where Weidermeier's not doing that. There is a sort of what have you done for me lately thing, and people just in the back of their mind, Weidermeier hasn't done anything in a little bit, right? And so that's kind of part of it as well. Listen, this is a deep class. If you get guys, none of these guys I think are first-round talents. Trey McBride might sneak into the first round because the team wants a tight end, but I don't think any of these guys are first-round tight ends. If you get any of these guys on day 2 or day 3, give or take 10 spots where we think they're going to go, I'm not going to complain. If they took Weidermeier with 38, I don't think that's egregious. I don't think it's egregious. There are other tight ends that I would take before him, but I don't think it's egregious. I don't think I'd be writing a think piece on the internet about it,
Yeah, that's kind of where I am in terms of even seeing Weidermeier with the drops. You see him as a blocker, and you see him when he does make plays with the ball. To get a guy, who can contribute, be a starter in that spot, no issues with that. It's going to be interesting to see where he goes, though. Isaiah Likely, very talented player. But is he as versatile as those guys? Is he as good of a blocker? From what I've watched, I don't think he is. But they're going to have some options there, which is what it boils down to, and makes it exciting, because when you have a need that's pressing, it feels like in years past, when if you racked and stacked the Jets' 2 or 3 biggest needs, those would be the 2 worst position groups in the class. So it kind of, you'd feel like you were stung. But wanted to touch next on a position that a lot of people are mocking the Jets to go. Some people, I think they have them going too early. And that's at corner. I mean, the Jets do need help at corner. I know, Brandon Echols was a nice story that he played well for considered his draft position, but he's not a guy. You don't go into a season and say, this guy's our definite number 2. Like, you want to absolutely have him compete with whoever comes in. Hopefully you land one in free agency. But I think you're going to take another one in the draft. I don't see them. I see people mocking Stingley at 4 and 10. I just don't see it. I know McShay had them taking a corner at 10, which, it would surprise me because I just think that I think we'll see them go corner, but I think it'll be in that round 2, 3, maybe round 1 if you trade down and add a pick or 2. But what do you think they do at corner?
It's been probably the most fascinating discourse I've seen from the Jets' perspective during draft season, because there's nothing about the way Robert Saleh coaches his defense, the way he structures his defense, that screams to me that he needs to take a corner in the top 10, right? Just doesn't scream that to me. And then you pair that with the fact that the guy that's being mocked to the Jets the most is Derek Stingley Jr., who, fantastic player. You put on that freshman tape from Derek Stingley Jr., you go, wow, this is a top 10 player. That was 2 years ago. That's the problem I have with Derek Stingley, is the tape that everyone is, going crazy about is from 2 years ago, has not gotten anywhere close to that production. And so that's a little concerning. Look, I think as currently constructed, I see these 3 corners coming off the board in the first round. I see Derek Stingley going somewhere, Andrew Booth, and Ahmad Sauce Gardner. Those 3 guys are first round corners are coming off the board. Then I start to get into, okay, is Roger Mccreery going to be a first-round corner? The size was a concern after the measurables at the Senior Bowl. Now, he didn't play like he was smaller than we anticipated. He went out and balled, and if the Jets were able to snag him at 35, you run to the podium with the pick at that point. Trent McDuffie, Kyler Gordon. I mean, these are all guys that I think could potentially sneak into the first round, depending on the evaluating team in question. But look, I look at guys that could potentially be there on day 2. Roger Mccreery, if the size is a concern for some teams, he could fall. Mario Goodrich, the other Clemson corner. Everyone talks about Andrew Booth. Put on some Mario Goodrich film. You'll be impressed. He could be definitely a day 2 guy. Kobe Bryant, the kid from Cincinnati, part of that great Cincinnati defense. There are guys that I saw down in Mobile that are not going to be sexy day 1, any of the top of the class guys, but they could be day 2 guys. They could be second or third round guys. They could even be day 3 guys that I think the Jets could find that could fit what they're looking for on defense. So I don't think it is a pressing need that the Jets absolutely have to take a corner with either 4 or 10. I do not believe that. I don't believe that's what Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas believe either. If they took Sauce at 10, I'd be good with that. I mean, I think Sauce, of the corners that I mentioned, the 3 in the first round, he's the guy that fits what they want to do the most. Plays, they want to play zone. That's what they do. And I think Sauce fits that. And so it's just going to be do they really love the skill set of Sauce enough to take him at 10? Or do they feel, man, there's a lot of other guys that we can take at 35, 38, end of day 2, beginning of day 3. And I think that's what they're ultimately going to end up doing. Or, and again, this is something that I think people just forget about. They could take 38 and say, you know what, we're moving back into the first round, the back half of the first round. We're going to take a guy because there's a guy that's starting to fall and we don't understand how this guy's still on the board. They could do that too.
Yeah, that was something I wondered out loud the other day. I actually tweeted it out that, you mentioned McBride not being a first rounder. And part of me wonders if the way he performed in the game and if that staff, if they like him enough, whether it's Saleh, whether it's LaFleur, do they say to Joe Douglas, look, man, give up a 4th to move up from 35 to 32 and grab this kid. We lock him up and we get an extra year out of him for being a first rounder versus a second. So I think moving up from 35 or 38 to 31 or 32 is in play regardless of the position. Like you said, if somebody's falling and you're the Jets and you have those 2 seconds at the top of the second, why not give one of them up along with a 3 or a 4 to move up a few spots and grab a guy?
I'll give you a perfect example, right? Let's say they take Ikem Ekwonu at 4, they take Jermaine Johnson at 10, and they're sitting there, they're done for the night. They've done their job. They've made their 2 picks. They've stayed at 4 and 10. They've done what they've needed to do. And Treylon Burks starts to fall. Jamison Williams starts to fall. And they're like, I don't know if they're going to get there at 35. Jacksonville's in front of us at the top of the second round. We need to move up. Well, guess what? That's what having that Carolina second's for, because you stay at 35, you offer a team 38, you have 2 fourths, you give them a 4th, you can give them something next year's draft, and you just go, can we just politely move up here, please, so we can take our guy, right? And then now all of a sudden you've got Ikem Ekwonu, you got Jermaine Johnson, and now you traded up for Trey McBride, Treylon Burks, Jamison Williams if you want to get an offensive playmaker. That is a realistic possibility that they could execute on draft night.
Yeah, that was one of the first thoughts I had, obviously, other than feeling bad for the kid when Jameson Williams got hurt. I thought to myself, if no one moves up, like the Chiefs are going to grab this guy. He's going
Yeah,
to fall to the Chiefs.
we can't let that happen. As
That-
a NFL fan base, we cannot let that happen. We cannot let the Chiefs get Jameson Williams.
Yeah, because he's a guy in a million years they don't get him if he's healthy, and then you see that injury and you go, oh God, now you can add him to that offense, a year from now, and no one's going to be able to stop them. So that would be far from ideal. But I'm glad you mentioned earlier, the fact that I don't see enough people talking about the importance, and I don't know if it's the fantasy football effect. I don't know if it's because it's the more entertaining side of the ball, but I hear so much talk about offense, 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 offense. And I just keep reminding people, I'm like, this defense just gave up 500 points for the first time in team history, the worst defense they've ever fielded. And people just, so what? You got to be able to score. You got to be able to score. And they point to what's happening in Cincinnati with their receivers. They point to a lot of these young offenses, but they don't look at, say, for example, Dallas, where they've spent a ton of money and a ton of premium picks on the offensive side of the ball, and they got shut down in the playoffs this year. They had a hard time finding the end zone. So it's the old there's more than one way to skin a cat. There's no perfect formula, but part of the formula, I promise you, is not giving up 500 points. So we've talked about corner. How dire of a need do you see safety as being? And do you use a pick at safety, or do you look at, because there are some good free agent players out there. Ashton Davis played a little better as the season went on, and the safety class, there aren't a ton of guys that you would want to take early on. How do you approach safety if you're Joe Douglas?
I'll tell you what, just to go back to the point that you were just making, because there's one safety in particular that I do want to talk about. The Chiefs lost the AFC Championship game, one, because they couldn't score in the second half, but two, they had a 21-3 lead, and their defense was Swiss cheese. So you got to have a defense. I know everyone's talking about, just get more playmakers for Patrick Mahomes. Can you help the defense out? Because Patrick Mahomes, look what he had to do against Buffalo. Yep. In order to just win the football game. He had to go to overtime and had to do all of those crazy theatrics just to be able to play in the AFC Championship game. And by the way, the Rams are playing in the Super Bowl in large part because they have Von Miller, Aaron Donald, and Jalen Ramsey. So they've built from their defense. It's a little bit of a stars and scrubs mentality, but they've got some studs on that team. So you can do this in different ways, and I think just trying to mirror what one team did is a recipe for disaster. If the Jets took Kyle Hamilton at number 4, Glenn, I wouldn't be upset with that. I would be okay. That would work for me. He's such a unicorn at the position. He just does so many things. He's just so athletic. He's just all over the place. He's just one of those players that you just watch on tape and you're like, oh, this guy just does everything. He just literally does everything. And if they took him at 4, I can't blame them. And again, in the draft community, and the NFL prioritizes this too, safety's not one of those positions you think of using a top 5 pick on, right? Left tackle, corner, quarterback, depending on if you're the Giants, a running back, right? You do these different things where you have these top positions that you prioritize and give that top 5 weight to. Safety is not normally one of those positions. Kyle Hamilton's that different of a player. He's just that different. After that, I think any of these other guys, Jaquan Brisker, Daxton Hill, Verone McKinley, I think all those guys are day 2, day 3 guys. Like, I just don't think they're guys that you're talking about making a pick in the first round. And I don't even know if you'd use 35 or 38 on one of those guys. I really don't. Yeah, that's really it for me. If you're going to go safety, it's Kyle Hamilton at 4. Listen, Jesse Bates is going to be a free agent after he's done with the Super Bowl. If he does not get tagged by the Cincinnati Bengals, and there's a good chance that they do that, that is a guy that I would circle if I was Joe Douglas. You can back up the Brinks truck for that guy.
Yeah, I think Hamilton is an interesting discussion. I'm very, I'm one of those guys. I don't want a safety that early on. But if you're going to get one, it's got to be a guy. I said before I'd even watched any of Hamilton a couple of months ago, I'd seen some highlights, but hadn't watched any full games yet. My number one thing was he better be, if you're even considering him, I think the example I gave, which slightly over the top, I said he's got to be, you have to believe he's Ed Reed if you're taking him at, or Troy Polamalu, something like that. But really in my mind, I'm thinking he's got to be able to do everything. Obviously, he can't have any holes in his game, but he's got to be able to cover a lot of ground and ball hawk. And
he does. Then he does those things.
That's what I was going to say. I threw on a couple of games and I see him. Which game was it? I'm drawing a blank now, but it gave me, FSU. We had 2 picks, and one of them, he's on the far hash, and he covers 2/3 of the field.
I know the play you're talking about. Yeah.
And I thought, well, there you go. Like, that's the thing I literally said. He's got to be able to do that. And now I've seen him do it. that made me a lot more comfortable with the possibility. I think the only way that happens, I think it's going to be a Saleh pick. I think it's going to be Robert Saleh saying, I just gave up 500 points. I need a guy who I can move around the field to do everything, and this is the guy who can do it. I still don't see it happening. There would be a part of me, maybe it's a little Jamal Adams PTSD, but I would kind of go, man, safety at 4. But really, if the guy, if he becomes the player you think he can be, then he's worth it at 4. I agree with that. I just think Joe Douglas, because we've seen him spend early picks on the premiums, the left tackle, quarterback, the big money on edge, and Carl Lawson. I tend to think he's going to go with Iquanu if one of the edge guys isn't there. But Hamilton, I'm far more comfortable with it now than I was a couple of months ago.
Just a different kind of player, right? And there's a scenario. It requires you to be really optimistic about the way that the board falls out. There's a chance he could also be there at 10. Like, we've done it. Like on the Draft Dudes podcast that I host with Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino, we do mocks every month, and we do these scenarios. It's played out that way where they're just so worried about, okay, Carolina needs a quarterback. We got to get the defense for we need an edge rusher for the Giants. And you just get so locked into what you're doing that Kyle Hamilton has fallen to the Jets at 10. It happened in the January mock that we did. He got there just because of the way that the needs of the other teams played out. So it's possible, but if you really like the guy, right, if he's atop your board, and I think there's a chance he might be, just that's how good of a player he is, that if he's there at 4, I think they'll just take him. They're not going to risk him being there at 10. But having that extra pick at 10 allows you to maybe be like, okay, we like a bunch of different guys. We'll take this guy here, and whichever one of these guys is left at 10, we'll take. It's a unique scenario that they find themselves in, a scenario that I don't think, like I said at the beginning of the show, I don't think any of us thought we were going to be in, where the Jets were going to have 2 top 10 picks. It's a great position for this team at this juncture to be in. But yeah, man, Kyle Hamilton at 4, like the more I do these mocks, when he's there at 4, it's hard for me to not click the button that says draft. Like, I'm just like, okay, I'll just put Kyle Hamilton in there. And I know Jamal Adams, I get it. I understand.
Yeah,
but
different
this is
players. Yeah.
Different player. And this guy's, it's a different coaching staff. It's like, this is just, it just makes sense, man. It would just be so much fun.
Yeah. I totally get that. And like I said, I think he's a different player than Jamal. Jamal was never a guy who intercepted the football, even in college. Only had 2 or 3 picks at LSU. Has only had 3 picks in a few years as a pro. Only 1 or 2 of those really, even against starting quarterbacks. This is the first season that guy intercepted a starting quarterback, which is crazy if you think about it. But I'm going to let you go. I just had one more quick question, because you mentioned teams, guys falling in the top 10. Is there a quarterback, Malik Willis is the guy who comes to mind. Is there a quarterback who can do enough to get a team like, say, the Pittsburgh Steelers or the New Orleans Saints, get a team to say, we need to get up to 10 to get this guy? I don't think any quarterback in this class is going to have anyone jumping to 4. But is there a guy who could have a team say, let's try to move up to 10 to grab this guy?
So the idea of 4 would be is if you're worried about Carolina at 6, right? That would be the only reason why you'd have to jump to 4. The Giants are going to take a quarterback with 5 or 7. They're committed to Daniel Jones for this season. Atlanta, they didn't take a quarterback last year, so they're not going to take one this year. Denver, we'll see with the Aaron Rodgers stuff, because if they don't do that, they're going to be in the market for a quarterback, right? If they don't land Russ or Rodgers or any of the guys that are available in the trade market, then they could be a team that could take a quarterback. So the only reason why you need to get 4 is if you need to get in front of Carolina. None of these quarterbacks impress me. And I think if you are a Jets fan, you should be very happy that the Jets did what they did, because I know there was a small portion of Jets fandom, and I heard about it from non-Jets fans in the TDN circle of, no, just stick with Sam for another year, give him another chance. And then at the end of that year, if it's over, you just move on. Do we really want to be taking a quarterback in this year's draft class? No, thank you. I'm very content with the decision that was made last year with Zach Wilson. Malik Willis is that guy that I think if a team's going to move up for, it's him. He was very impressive throughout the week in Mobile. Joe Marino of the Draft Network, he said it so many times, it is actually a quote above my work setup here. I had to put on a frame here. Malik Willis on day 1 of practice had the 5 best throws of practice, and he had the 5 worst throws of practice. Yep. He was on both ends of the spectrum. Then he took coaching the next day from the Lions coaching staff, because that was the group that he was with, and he got better as the week went on. You can just tell the traits are there for this guy that these other guys don't have. He can run. He can extend plays. He has that natural arm strength to get the ball down the field. He's got those things that Kenny Pickett just doesn't have. He has things that Carson Strong just doesn't have, that Sam Howell doesn't have, that Bailey Zappi doesn't have. Just naming the quarterbacks that were there. Desmond Ridder, the guys that were there in Mobile. He stands out because he has traits that those guys don't have. He has those things that you can't teach. You can teach a good portion of the quarterback play from the neck up, right? You can teach the processing, you can teach the scheme, you can get them on a whiteboard, and you can coach a guy up. You can't teach the athleticism part of the game. And Malik Willis has that. It's the other stuff that he has to work on. But if there's a guy, I think the NFL is going to bet on traits, and they're going to bet on Malik Willis, and that would be the guy that a team would go up and trade for.
All right. Chris Schubert of the Draft Network, thanks so much for taking the time to join us. Really looking forward to you guys continuing to cover the draft leading up to the day and then beyond. Because, as soon as the draft ends, everyone start mocking the next one.
2023. Right? 2023 starts the moment that day 3 is over. We're on. 2023 begins.
Yep. All right. So thanks a lot for joining us, Chris. We really appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
All right. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.